Working? Oh, there you are. Yay.
I'm here. I tried to do it on my computer, but I failed. So should I try again?
No, it actually, I should have told you it only works on phones for some reason. I have no
Well, there you go then. Perfect. Well, I'll just hold you up here.
That'll work. Um, okay, so welcome, those of you who have joined us. This is The Craft of Crime Fiction, my interview series where I talk to writers of thrillers and mysteries and literary fiction about how they do what they do. And I'm Polly Stewart, by the way, and I'm so excited to welcome tonight Danya Kukafka, author of Notes on an Execution. I absolutely devoured William Morrow books. So, hi, Danya. Thanks so much for being here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. This is my first ever Instagram Live. I've never done it before, so forgive me if I'm a little spazzy, but I'm happy to be here.
Good experience. This is my second on Instagram.
Okay.
Good. So I'm wondering if we could start by just talking a little bit about the book, and for readers who may not have had a chance to pick it up yet, could you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, I'll give you my quick spiel. So, Notes on an Execution is the story of a serial killer named Ansel Packer. Um, it opens on the 12th hour before he's going to be executed by the state of Texas, and it counts down from 12 hours to 0 hours. But the fun part is the book is not really about him at all, actually. It's about really about the women in his life who tell the story of his life and of their own lives, the women who have been permanently affected by his violence.
Right. Yeah, that's wonderful. And you have all these intersections giving us kind of different angles on the harm this man has done. And so lots to talk about there. I love seeing authors with a feminist perspective interrogate the true crime, because I know, so much of us are consuming true crime, but at the same time say about it. And I read in another watching true crime shows with your mom. So I'm wondering if you could tell us about that and how you think about the genre now.
Yeah, I saw my mom actually just joined this live. So hi, mom, if you're out there. So yeah, I really got the idea for this book by watching shows when I was growing up, and through my 20s and still now, watching shows like CSI Miami, Law and Order SVU, which by the way is still one of my absolute favorites. I like sometimes can't believe it's still going, but I love it. And I felt like that those shows just had a similar narrative that continued over and over again and became very, very repetitive over time. So I felt like I kept turning on the TV, seeing the pretty dead white girl, watching the police hunt down the killer, and he goes to prison, and yay, the story's over. And I felt like there had to be more to the story, like there was something else running underneath it, right? So that's really how I came to the idea of this novel, was by being a consumer and lover of true crime myself, and of like network narrative crime. I feel like we have loved it as a culture for so long, and we rarely interrogate why. We just consume it and consume it, and the appetite for it feels endless, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, but once you start thinking sort of into it, there's just so much to say about the narrative and the people involved. And when I started hearing about your novel last year, I just, I knew your writing and I knew it was going to be well written, but there was a part of me that thought, oh, a serial killer, because I always avoid reading or watching anything about serial killers. I love true crime. And it's not so much the goriness, it's that I don't find them interesting as characters usually. I feel like you're very much building a narrative with that he's aside from his crimes, there's not a lot going on with him. So I was wondering if you could just kind of talk about how you created that character.
Yeah, Ansel is definitely a sort of conglomeration of many serial killers I've seen and studied over the years, not even intentionally studied, right? Like, I feel like we have this image in our heads of what the American male serial killer looks like, and he's usually sort of vaguely in the shape of a Ted Bundy, right? We kind of think he's smart, too smart, like he's some kind of like evil mastermind. We kind of think that he is handsome and charming and he can fool all these people into thinking he's a good person, right? When actually a lot of the time what I've seen is they're pretty average and they're pretty boring. And I think what I wanted to do with Ansel was to really show that you know, it's not like a huge skill to kill people. It's not it's not like a particularly exciting thing you can do. It doesn't take a lot of, you know, brain power, generally speaking, and especially serial killers almost always get caught. So I think that is just a uniquely American myth that needs to be dispelled. And that was part of how I thought of Ansel's character, was just, you know, how can he embody all those traits while also showing us that they're a lie. They're a story we've been telling ourselves as a collective for so many years.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. And the part where that all kind of clicked for me is he has this grand theory, which I won't spoil the specifics, but it sounds like something that college, like smoking a lot of weed, would come up with. But he thinks he's going to have this manifesto that's going to, you know, sort of put him on the map. And had fun kind of working with that, you know, the difference between his self-image and what he presents to the reader.
Yeah, I had so much fun with that. And especially, I love that you said it's like a college freshman, because I've gotten that. I think my editor and my agent and I've sort of had that conversation too. Like, this is like pretty basic philosophy 101 for the most part. But in his brain, he's like the smartest person alive. And I think there has to be a disconnect between what the reader sees of his intelligence and what he sees of his own intelligence, right? So it has to be pretty clear to the reader that his theory and his manifesto is not going to get him anywhere special, even though he likes to believe that it will. And one of my favorite moments that I play with a lot throughout this book is the question of the manifesto as a concept, right? And there's a moment where one of the prison guards or wardens says, you know, you're just like everyone else writing a manifesto. And he's like, how dare you? This is not just a manifesto, but of course it is.
Yeah. And it also gets, like, love that. Now that we have some people joining us, I did want to say, if anyone has questions for Danya, I'm hoping maybe some of the listeners will tune in, but maybe we'll save those for a little bit, because I know it's hard to keep track of what's coming up on the bottom of the screen. But please hold on to your questions if you have some. So I really wanted to talk about, while you were, you know, sort of on the way to publication, you posted some pages from the process journal that you used to write the novel on Instagram. And it was so amazing. And could you just talk about that?
Yeah, so I started keeping for this novel a really intensive process journal. And Polly, I'm curious if you do anything similar as a writer, because I know you have a book yourself. And I'm curious how your process was in sort of keeping track of where you are in the writing of the book, which is very different from the writing itself of the book, right? I know a lot of writers keep journals in which they write fiction, but this is not that. For me, it's more of a daily diary of the creative work that I'm trying to do. So every day I sit down, I count the number of hours I'm working. I count what's working in the manuscript that day, what's not working in the manuscript that day. And then what comes up next, because I find it's really important upon leaving a writing session to know what's coming next, so that when you sit down the next day and you're fresh and new and maybe tired, you sort of have a little map that you left for yourself the day before. So I do keep a really, really intense process journal, and it's kind of shifted over a period of many years, the format of it. So I'm now less focused on hourly count than I was when I was writing notes on an execution, just because my next book is not requiring that of me right now. But I still am doing, you know, what's working, what's not. And it's really interesting to look back at all those threads and to be able to see exactly what you've done. Even if it doesn't feel like you've gotten anything done, you have proof that you are working and you are sitting down and showing up to the page every day.
Yeah, I think it's such an amazing idea. And one reason I wanted to ask you about it is I may take it as an inspiration.
Yeah, I'm like sharing the gospel everywhere. I really recommend it. I like to say, you know, that writing quote that's like, you know, your headlights can only show you as a few feet ahead, but you can take the whole journey that way, right? I like to think of it as like your headlights only show you a few feet ahead, but when you use a process journal and you keep track of yourself that way, you can also see everywhere you've already been at any given moment, whereas it doesn't just fade into the background, right? You can go back and look at it at any time, which I find really, really helpful.
Yeah, I really love that idea. And I'm someone who messy drafts. You know, I just interviewed a writer, Ace Atkins, who was saying he revises as he goes, so he has a like perfect draft when he gets to. I couldn't do that. So
Oh, I can't even imagine what that must be like. I am so not that person either.
I love, yeah, building that in is great. So this may have been part of your process with the process journal, but you have multiple points of view with this novel, and there's really a distinct voice for each of the characters. So how did
Yeah, so this has been sort of a struggle for me throughout my writing process with my first book and with this book that I have discovered is just part of how it goes for me. And it's a long process of figuring out the perspectives of the characters. And for this book, I had quite a few false starts. It actually started from the perspective of half from the perspective of a character who's not even in there anymore, who's Blue. So the book used to be half told from Blue's perspective, and it really wasn't working. And I had to throw it out and re-envision entirely what the book was going to be about, what the purpose of it was, and who was going to tell the story. And in that moment, I had to think about, which characters are the most interesting to me, which are the most central to the purpose of the plot, and which characters I felt like could fulfill the purpose of the story, right? And that was also a process of hit or miss and trial and error. And it was over a span of many years. And I found that switching characters, I often will write one character for a period of weeks or months, and then switch to another and write them for a period of weeks or months. And I also find, I don't know if I'm always curious. Do you listen to music when you write, Polly?
I don't. I write very early in the morning while my kids are asleep, and I like the quiet. Do you?
Okay. So I have different songs that I listen to for each character, and that's really helpful for me to switch in between them. So for this book, I had like one song for each character that I felt like really embodied the feeling of them. And if I listened to it right when I sat down, I felt like I could get specifically into that person, which I know is a really weird thing. A lot of writers don't do.
I love that idea, though. I mean, have you made a playlist anywhere, or are you willing to share what the songs are? I'm just
Yeah,
curious.
I had a playlist for Girl in Snow. It was published somewhere, but I've never actually published one for this book. I can tell you what the songs were though. They changed a little over a span of, the 5 years that I was writing the book, but the major song for this novel, like whenever I wanted to like really get into the headspace of the book and particularly of Ansel, there's a really, really, really sad song out there. It's called Creeks by Bon Iver. And it's like desperately sad. And I would listen to that and just like really get into the mood. And let's think, one of the other ones, there's a Florence and the Machine song. I think it's called Jenny of Oldstone. And that was a song for Lavender for me. And it's also like really like ethereal. And once again, they're always super sad. So I don't know what that says about me.
Well, it's appropriate for. Yeah, I think that would be the mood that you're establishing there. That's awesome. So we were talking about point of view, and I particularly wanted to ask you about the second person with Ansel. And what I would tell my students is that second person establishes intimacy between the character and the reader, but in this novel, it somehow does the opposite, where I felt more distance from Ansel. I think that's a good thing, but I was wondering how you and how you worked with it.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've heard both. I've heard both takes on the second person in this novel. I've had readers tell me that it made them feel too close to him and that was uncomfortable. And I've had readers say that, they needed that closeness to feel like they understood him. And I've had readers say that it made them feel distant from him. So I think it's been really interesting to see sort of which version hits which person. And for me, it definitely brought me closer to him. And I'm glad to hear that you found relief in being a little distant from him. But what I learned from writing the second person was that it afforded me like a sort of immediacy, I felt like, to really put the reader directly in his brain, to say like, you are the serial killer, you are in prison, you are, experiencing all these extremely visceral physical details of being in prison. And those moments felt more natural to me in the second person. I'd actually written them in the third person first. And when I switched to the second, it was kind of just like a little like electrical jolt. It was great.
Well, Well, and I could see that because it's a point of view that we associate with like choose your own adventure or, stories that are putting you right in the action. So yeah, I love to go back and look at that. Um, so the first section of the novel is about Ansel's childhood, and I was so amazed with by the writing, but there were moments I had to put the book down because it's there's so much trauma, and I was wondering, was it hard to write, and how sort of that section of his life factors into how you think about the character overall.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely hard to write. I think that first chapter, Lavender's first chapter, which is his mother, is definitely one of the saddest things I've ever written. Which I've written a lot of sad things, but that one was one of the toughest. But for me, it was really important because the book touches on all these questions of nature versus nurture, right? Are we born of the things that happen to us, or are we making choices based on how we're nurtured? Is it all in our genes? All those questions, right? And Ansel's had a horribly, horribly hard life. And considering those questions and considering what he goes on to do, what really struck me about the difficulty of his childhood was that Safi, one of the other characters, has a similarly very difficult childhood with lots of similar traumas. At one point, they share a home in which they have very similar traumas happening, and she does not go on to murder people. And I think there's a sense of human choice in there that I really wanted to tug at, while also acknowledging that, of course, trauma like that is real, and of course it will affect someone.
Yeah, that's beautifully done. I think that balance, yeah, makes a lot of sense. Um, so we're talking about Lavender, who is a character that opens the novel, and Ansel's mother. I know that a lot of writers who have characters who challenge, kind of the societal expectations of motherhood will hear from readers about that, and Lavender ends up making to leave her children. So I was wondering how how you came to that, and also how people have responded to it.
Yeah. It's funny. People say, I don't know if you experience this as a writer, but people will sometimes be like, where do your characters come from? Why do they do the things they do? And part of me does think it's like magic, right? They do the things that they want to do. They do the things that they need to do. And for me, there was never any other choice for Lavender. I never really considered a world in which she didn't do that, because it felt, given her circumstance, which I understand I totally made up, it felt like she had to. And that was always the case. And that was always what she was going to do. And for me, it was an act of survival rather than an act of betrayal or abandonment. It's what she physically has to do to stay alive. I have had many readers comment on that, and they've actually almost been all moved by it in the way I intended. I've had very little. I was surprised. I've been surprised to see I've had very little backlash for that.
I'm glad to hear that, because you're absolutely right. It's the right decision for the character, and she grapples with the consequences. Yeah. So I was emailing you about how to talk about the ending of this novel, because it is absolutely my favorite thing. I think it's absolutely brilliant, and I don't want to spoil it for any readers. But we get to this part where we're sort of examining how the lives of the characters could have gone differently, and just as much as you want to say about that and your process in writing that, I'd love to hear.
Oh, yes. I had so much fun with this concept when I was writing the idea of the multiverse, right? Like the idea that there are infinite selves out there, and that concept can be a relief to someone like Ansel, who needs an escape and who needs to believe there's another world in which he could have been better. But it can also be really devastating when you realize that there are, it doesn't really matter if there's a multiverse, right? Because we only have this one experience. And one of the most satisfying moments for me in writing this book was coming up with the epilogue, those last pages, because it tied so beautifully for me into what Ansel sort of fantasizes about living a different life, while also sort of pushing back in his face what he's taken away, the potential he's taken away from these girls' lives. So that for me was a really powerful moment in writing. And it was funny because that epilogue just sort of like came to me so randomly. It was not planned. I just had a moment where I was like, where would they be now? And that was kind of where it came from. It was like on a Sunday after a brunch, I sat down and was like, yeah, let's think about that. And it hadn't been a part of the book up until then. Once I thought of that, I was able to give Safi a lot of those questions as well, and that was partially on the advice of my very smart editor Jessica, who said, maybe Safi can wonder these things for them too, so that they get a little more screen time and they're able to like really you're able to really consider what they could have been and the lives they could have lived.
That makes sense. I see now the way that that's built in, and to me, just to get back to what we were saying about the true crime, a certain narrative that we're used to, and a woman's life ends at a certain point, and it's when a violent man ended, and then you kind of showed all the ways that your life could have been different, and yeah, I thought that was beautiful.
Thank you.
So you do write full time. Are you also working as an agent?
I'm also working as an agent now. So I'm doing both. I'm, kind of toggling day to day between what is taking up more of my physical space, but agenting is my full-time day job. And I love it very much.
And you worked as an editor as well. So I'm wondering, how do you think you approach the work differently as a writer, having had those experiences?
You would think I would like have some like brilliant marketplace insight that nobody else knows about, or like I can see what's working and I'm doing that. But in the end of the day, I'm just writing what I feel like I want to. And on the page, I don't think it affects me all that much. What does affect me is reading all the time, which is very good for the brain, the writer's brain and any human's brain, I think. And what does affect me also is working with other writers and seeing their processes, which I love. And that's the whole reason I do it. Because I love being a part of other people's processes, and like having now published 2 books and having gone through the process myself, I'm very eager to sort of help people talk through it, and also sort of, just live those experiences alongside them. I find it really meaningful. So I've really enjoyed it. And I can't say that I've taken any like magical skills from knowing about the industry. If anything, it's just made me an anxious mess, but I was always going to be an anxious mess anyway.
Would fall into that category. So here. Well, you said that you don't think you necessarily have insider insights into marketing, but I do wonder how you think about the way this book has been sold, and do you think of it as a thriller or literary fiction?
I definitely don't think of it as a thriller. I think any book with murder crime in it is automatically going to be thriller adjacent, just based on what readers like and what readers ask for from thrillers, or from crime fiction. I don't think this one fits that bill really at all. In fact, literally on the first page who did it. But I do think there are mystery elements to this book, and I do think it falls under the general umbrella of crime fiction, where a lot of thrillers and mysteries also fall. So when people ask me what I write, I usually say literary fiction with crime bent, or crime fiction. And I find that to be a clearer, I don't know, I think if you're expecting a thriller going into this, you're not going to be very happy.
Yeah. Well, literary fiction with crime, I think you're bringing everything, all the best things together. So it works for me. So, I assume I'm just going to look here again. The cover, I think, is so beautiful, and we have a lot here, which, braids into the narrative in a really interesting way. So can you talk about the process of the design there and how involved you were?
Yeah. It's funny. An author, as you probably know, doesn't always get a ton of say. And, we get not usually say from the very beginning, but they'll send us options and we'll like them or not like them. And they'll send us new options, things like that, right? We do have sort of consulting say. But from the very start in this process, my editor asked me for a vision board for this book. And I think that was really helpful in terms of just showing her visually how this book felt to me. So I went on Pinterest and I got a bunch of pictures of like chopped off tree logs and like knives and like sad forests and things like that. And what turned out to be the most effective was just a very human feeling cover that I absolutely love. And we had seen one other cover before this one that I also really liked. But the word we kept coming back to, I think, was like, it needs to feel a little bit more iconic. Like it needs to have like a really distinct sense to it. And the other one had felt a little more vague. And the idea of the jewelry was not my idea. I think it's so smart, and it was also not my idea to hire the artist who drew the locket. Her name's Hak-Young Kim, and she's amazing. She does a bunch of drawings for like the New York Times and the New Yorker. You know those like beautiful drawings that are at the top of journalism articles. She does a lot of those, and I really recommend following her on Instagram. She's so talented, and she came up with the like drape of the locket and the blue house inside the locket. And then actually at the last minute, we added the woman's face inside the locket on the other side to give it a little more of a human element as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's funny. You know, now I'm picturing it with what you said, sad forest. I think is such a great term, and it would be so different in the way that we'd approach the
Mm-hmm.
novel cover. So that's brilliant. So I asked you ahead of time if we could talk about this, but I know there's a TV show in the works, and I'm wondering if you can kind of talk about where that is in the process.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I mean, it's still very early days, but there is a TV show in the works with John Wells Productions, and they're affiliated with Warner Brothers, and they did the Netflix show Made that I love, which is also an adaptation of a book, and that one's a memoir. And they're so smart and so cool, and I'm just really excited. I'm really excited to see where the process goes. It's still, still super early, so nothing big to report yet. But yeah, I have high hopes for how the TV show could look. They seem to really, really understand the book on a fundamental level, which is huge.
Oh, that's so important. And how
Mm-hmm.
be with the writing, or has that been decided?
Yeah, I will be an executive producer on it. So I will, at the very least, be, involved on the sort of production level. And then I hope if there's a writer's room to be in there.
Oh, wonderful! Wow. Well, we will all look for that. And speaking of future, what are now?
Sorry, what am I reading now?
Oh, no, what are you working on?
What am I working on now? I am working on a new novel. Slowly but surely. This one I think is going to take me a little bit longer. It's somehow even weirder and darker, which is kind of my jam these days, I guess. But it's been slow going as I sort of build the agenting side of my career, and I'm content with that. I am taking for the first time ever a weekend away to only write in a couple of weeks, and I think it'll be really interesting. I've never done that before. I'm not very good at being alone usually. So like unlike most writers, I really like to talk. I really like to talk. I do not like to be by myself. So I'm going away for like 48 hours to a tree house to work in like 2 weeks. So I'll report back. We'll see how that goes.
I am a huge fan of the Airbnb writing retreats. I mean, that's interesting. I am a total introvert, so that's like, yeah, right up my alley. To hear how that goes, I think they're great. um, so we have a new novel to look forward to. What in terms of new work that you things that have recently come out, or things that you're blurbing, or are you excited about?
Yeah, one of my clients named Erin Swan has this beautiful book. Oh, where is it? There it is. Walk the Vanished Earth, right behind me. It has a beautiful cover. I am her agent along with Michelle Brower, who works at the same agency as me. And this book is coming out with Viking on May 31st, and I'm obsessed with it. So I obviously highly recommend that for personal reasons, but also I just love it so much, and you're going to love it too. It's speculative. It takes place a little bit like on the Western Plains in the 1800s and a little bit on Mars. And it's about one family and the legacy of the American dream and how families and people change over time. It's so beautiful. And then I just finished reading More Than You'll Ever Know by Katie Gutierrez, which is so good. It's sort of a twist on the, man has a secret wife and child somewhere, a secret second family, but it's actually a woman who has a secret second family, and it all comes to blow up on her. And then I also just finished Heartbroke by Chelsea Beaker, which I love short stories, but these were, I think, just like some of the most exceptional short stories I've ever read. So that's, yeah, Heartbroke by Chelsea Beaker.
Oh wow, yeah, More Than You Know is incredible, and I will definitely put those other ones on my list. That sounds great. So we have just a couple minutes here, but I'm wondering if anyone who's joined us has questions for Danya. Wants to.
While they're thinking, maybe, Polly, I can ask you about your book a little bit.
Yeah, so it's called The Good Ones. It's coming out next summer from Harper Books, and I'm just finishing Light Edits, which is just a great feeling. And now
Yay! Congratulations.
I guess I have a year to be nervous about.
It's a weird year. I recommend finding a hobby, and I recommend knitting. It's helped me a lot.
Scarf you made. Yeah, maybe I'll pick that up.
Yeah, definitely recommend.
Okay. Well, Danya, thank you so much for being here. I just enjoyed this so much and love your work and look forward to what's next.
This was so fun. Thank you so much for having me. Baby's first ever Instagram Live. I feel like it was great.
It went very smoothly. So
Yes. All right. Well, thank you so much, Polly. Really appreciate it. Have a great night.
take care,
Bye.
buddy.